Chapter 2, we're going to be talking about what makes America great. We have 5% of the world's population, 12% of the arable land, and yet we produce 20% of the world's output. How is that possible? This chapter is going to tell us how we do it. Two terms you're going to see quite a bit in here: GDP and GDP per capita. GDP simply refers to the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's borders within a given time period. We often use GDP to compare different nations. That was never its intended purpose. GDP was intended to be used to compare to your own historical values. We can think of GDP as a way to look at our production possibilities curve, as you remember back to chapter 1. If GDP is growing, what we're seeing is a shifting of our production possibilities. It's what we call economic growth. It means that it's shifting out. Because GDP has the problem of not taking size into account or any of those things, there's another term that we often use to compare, and that's GDP per capita, which basically means how much you would get if everything was distributed evenly right now. We basically take all the output produced within a nation's borders, within a nation, or within a time period, and divide that by population to get our GDP per capita. There's still problems there, things we have to worry about. You know, if in this classroom we had Bill Gates, for instance, what would be the average income of this class? Would it be accurate? No, of course not. But it's a little better measure of the average living standard in a nation. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit better. But again, it was intended to look at historical values and compare yourself and how you're growing. So we need to be careful of these two measures, but they are useful to see our own chart, our own historical growth. Today's mix of output in the United States can be accounted for by 75% in the service sector. So what is a service? A service is something that doesn't produce a product. Things like restaurant meals, tax services, lawyers, doctors, those are all services. They don't actually produce a product that you buy, but they give you something useful. You know, on my own scale, I hire a neighborhood boy to come over and mow my grass. That's a service. 75% of our nation's output now is services. Our economy is based more on service than it ever has been. Our #1 export right now, if we look at that, is entertainment. Hollywood, sports, those things. That's our #1 export. Those are all services. They have nothing to do with production. So keep that in mind as we go through this. One way to look at the way the world is, in economic terms, we can explain why there is such a discrepancy in countries. There is a reason why the rich nations get richer and the poor nations get poorer. And this next section in here that talks about today's mix of output explains it all. If we look at that worldwide stage, this is the most important thing. In this chapter, this is probably the meat and potatoes of this chapter. It's the part I would pay the most attention to. Our output can be divided into 4 categories. We have consumer goods, we have investment, government, and net exports. If we look at that, the first category comprises 70% of our current output. You don't have to remember all these percentages, but they really illustrate a point. 70% of everything we produce is for consumption. Now, a consumption good is something that you buy for your personal use. You're not going to produce anything else with it. You're buying it to use. Even cars and things like that are consumables. And it's right around, actually, I believe it's a little higher than that. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 75% now. That's not exactly a bad thing, but we have to take that in balance. Investment goods comprise a lot less. Here, we're only looking at about 17%. Investment goods are very important if we look at economic growth. What shifts this curve? Two things. Resources and technology. That's what shifts that curve. It's either got to be more resources or better technology. Well, how do you get those? You invest. You put money away for another day. Investment is expenditures on production of new plant and equipment, structures, inventories, things of that nature you're not going to use today. So, in investment, we've got to look at two different things. Investment can be broken out. First, you have maintenance. Maintenance of your current equipment comes under investment. If you do not maintain your machinery, it will break down. It will become useless. So we have to pay attention to that. The other part is expansion. The continual adding of new capital goods, new machinery, new plants, better education, all those things are investments. Investment is extremely important. It is the most important of these four to expanding this curve. That's what gives you economic growth, is that. Investment. Okay? Government. This too can be broken down into two categories. First of those categories is something called a transfer payment. Transfer payments in our economy are very important. Transfer payments refer to money given to someone for no current good or service. The classic examples, this would be Social Security and welfare. But we can also look at Head Start, financial aid, lots of things. It's taking money away from one individual and giving it to another for nothing more, or for nothing current. Okay? That's transfer payment. Very, very important in our economy. Also, the government does produce. The government actually produces things like roads, police, schools, all those types of things, those services that we need. That comes out of that government sector. The last category here is net exports. Net exports right now is actually a negative number. The reason for that is net exports is exports minus imports. Something that traditionally the U.S. has done is had a trade deficit, meaning that we bring more in than we send out.